Life has been a lonely existence for this man, severely retarded, confined to a wheelchair. He's had only one home for the past 30 years, the Granger Nursing Home in Toledo. The state of Ohio says his name is Eddie Shabbing. But June Drake says the state has it all wrong. She says her brother, Eddie Shabbing, died in 1972 and lies buried in this unmarked grave.
Another boy was there with my brother's identity. And to see him, Mom knew this was not her child.
June says no one took her mother seriously when she insisted her son had been switched with another boy. She was certain her Eddie was dead.
She asked that they produce her son's body, and they continually said that this was her son was alive.
In fact, the nursing home's owner, Pearl Granger, swore in legal documents that Eddie Shabbing was living in her facility. But the I-Team has learned there were two Eddies at the Granger home, Eddie Shabbing and Eddie Barnes, both close in age, dark-haired and mentally retarded. Both had been in the same state hospital before going to Toledo. They arrived within a month of each other.
Her fervor was what was convincing them.
Paul Young was the first to take June's mom seriously during that turbulent time. He was an assistant administrator at the state institution where the Eddies had lived.
There had been things said by others involved in the case that the mother had a history of personal problems and so on. And again, my feeling was, all of that aside, mamas know their babies.
Young found an aide who had cared for both boys. He drove her to the Granger home and asked her to identify the boy in question.
She was convinced that it was Eddie Barnes.
Remember, the state and Pearl Granger insisted he was Eddie Shabbing, June's brother. The boy was taken to a nearby hospital where a doctor compared medical records of the two Eddies. In a letter to the state, the doctor noted there were serious discrepancies between the patient he examined and Eddie Shabbing's medical report. He said, "I find it difficult to believe that the eye color would change and that reflexes would recover." Still, the doctor said he couldn't definitely prove the patient was Eddie Barnes or Eddie Shabbing. Nevertheless, June's mom was encouraged.
She seemed to think that this would do it for her case, that this would be enough evidence right there to win her case.
June's mom filed suit for wrongful death. The judge threw it out, saying she failed to establish her son was dead. Eventually, she gave up, and so did the state.
And we just assumed, I suppose, that it was resolved by then. We hadn't heard anything more.
30 years came and went, and June grew up. She buried her mother, but not her mother's hope that the mystery of Eddie Shabbing would be solved. June spent 5 years studying her mother's old papers, looking for any new information. That led to an unbelievable discovery. The boy long ago represented as her brother Eddie was still alive, still living in the same Toledo nursing home where June had first seen him in the 70s.
He still has my brother's identity. We'll do this DNA thing, and we'll solve this problem right now.
By now, an agency called APSI had been given guardianship of Ed. June asked its representatives for help getting him DNA tested.
There was a sense of wanting to help June fulfill what her mother wanted and what she and her family wanted.
And the test came back. He is no way, shape, or form related to me or my siblings.
The DNA test may have proven the living Ed was not June's brother, but without the Barnes family, she couldn't prove her mother's theory.
I haven't had any luck finding them.
That's when she contacted the I-Team. We found the Barnes family through a search of public records. Although they declined to be interviewed for this story, they agreed to provide a sample of DNA. We asked Identigene, a Houston lab, to run the test. Decades of denial would be unraveled in less than a week. We got the results of the DNA test back, and it confirmed what your mother knew all along, that Edward Barnes is living in the Granger home.
Thank you.
How could such a horrible mistake go uncorrected for such a long time? The I-Team has learned Eddie Barnes' father identified the dead child as his boy. When contacted in 1973 after the funeral, He firmly stated he identified the body of his son, that other relatives viewed the body and identified it, that he was satisfied the child buried was his son. How could a father not recognize his own child? According to logs kept by the state and unearthed by the I-Team, it was 1966 when Eddie Barnes last saw anyone from his family. That means they hadn't laid eyes on him from the time he was 6 until the age of 12. And why, given the evidence, did the state not contact June's mother and give her back her son, now buried in someone else's grave? Ohio's Department of Mental Health and Mental Retardation never got back to the I-Team with an answer. But APSE's Terry Derry has her own theory.
It's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. And I don't know if she had the money or the ability to keep pushing her cause.
What she did have was a daughter determined to keep a promise.
She's standing here bawling like I am. But it's also the beginning of another road. Now we have to take steps to get Eddie where he belongs. My Eddie.